found among some of the wreckage of the Titan submersible. We had seen pictures of the submersible wreckage today in Canada, offloaded onto shore in Newfoundland, Canada, and now we know, according to the Coast Guard, that human remains were among some of that wreckage. I want to put up the statement, the relevant portion of the statement from the Coast Guard. It says, in part, quote, United States medical professionals will conduct a formal analysis of presumed human remains that have been carefully recovered within the wreckage at the site of the incident. And we do have some of the pictures of the pieces of wreckage offloaded today from a ship in Canada. You can see what appears to be the nose cone, the front of the submersible that surrounds the area that would have been the porthole, also a twisted piece of the hull and some wires, potentially maybe the controls or portion of the controls of that submersible. But again, really just within the last 20 to 30 minutes, some information that families likely have been waiting on, that human remains were discovered. We had heard from the Coast Guard that they would be especially careful in trying to find that wreckage, to be aware of any remains that were to be found. But we now know that the remains, along with the evidence, will be transported on a U.S. Coast Guard cutter from Canada to the U.S. to be part of this investigation. It's also likely that officials will try to identify the remains. No information about to whom those remains belong, but obviously families likely were waiting for some amount of information regarding their loved ones and any remains that could be recovered. The Coast Guard saying that they did so today. Blake.
On June 18th, 2023, Titan, a submersible operated by OceanGate, went missing in international waters in the North Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada. The submersible was on a tourist expedition to view the wreckage of the RMS Titanic with 5 individuals on board, including the founder and CEO of OceanGate, Scotland Rush. Due to the estimated 3 days of oxygen supply, there was a huge rescue effort by the US Coast Guard and Canada's Coast Guard, which was unsuccessful until early on June 22nd, when evidence of the wreckage of the vessel started to emerge, leading to the tragic conclusion that the vessel imploded in the ocean depths and there were no survivors. Tourism industry and research and exploration. The company was founded in 2009 by Stockton Rush and Guillermo Solin. Stockton Rush wanted to be an astronaut, so he got his commercial pilot license to undersea exploration. He was married to Wendy Rush, a descendant of Isidore and Ida Strauss, 2 people who actually passed away on the sinking of the Titanic, which ties into the story here today. The tragic events happened during a deep-sea tourism expedition to explore the wreckage of the Titanic, which sunk in the northern Atlantic in 1912. Greater engineering challenge. It all comes down to pressure. We don't think about air pressure because at sea level it's just 14.7 pounds per square inch. That pressure is the result of the column of air that reaches above us, but water is a much more dense fluid than air. The Titanic is sitting on the ocean floor at about 12,500 feet below sea level. The 2 broken parts of the ship, the bow and the stern, are more than 2,600 feet apart and surrounded by debris after over 100 years of being in the bottom of the ocean. Let's put this depth into perspective. Imagine laying on your back with a 1 foot by 1 foot board, okay? And how much weight you'd feel on that board. At 100 meters, the size of a soccer or football field, we have the pressure of 10 atmospheres, or 145 psi, which means on that 1 by 1 foot board, we would feel the weight of 20,880 pounds. That is 4.7 Tesla Model Ys. At 381 meters, 1,250 feet, we have the height of the Empire State Building in New York City. At this depth, we would feel 37.4 atmospheres of pressure, and that 1 by 1 foot board would feel the weight of 80,000 pounds. At 490 meters, we have the max dive depth of the C-class of US Navy submarine. Here, we'd feel 48.5 atmospheres of pressure. That 1 by 1 foot board would feel the weight of 94,800 pounds. At 828 meters, we have the height of the Burj Khalifa. Here, we'd feel 82 atmospheres. That weight on the board would be 173,520 pounds. Now, this is around the same depth as the deepest diving submarine in operation today, the Oscar-class submarine in the Russian Navy. At 3,800 meters sits the wreckage of the Titanic. Here, the pressures are 376 atmospheres. That 1 by 1 foot board on our chest would have the weight of 797,000 pounds. The OceanGate Titan was rated for a mass dive depth of about 4,000 meters. Now that might sound insane, but actually it's not even the record for the deepest human beings have been. That honor goes to James Cameron. and the Deep Sea Challenger built in Australia in 2012. The Deep Sea Challenger reached the deepest part of the Mariana Trench in the Pacific Ocean, the deepest point on Earth, at a mind-boggling 11,000 meters or 36,000 feet. Here, we'd feel 1,090 atmospheres of pressure, and that 1x1 foot board would have the weight of 2.3 million pounds on it. Compare that to the difference in pressure of an airplane at cruising altitude of 36,000 feet, where outside the pressure might be 3 psi, and on the inside between 10 and 12. And that hopefully puts in perspective why more people have been to space than have been into the deepest parts of our ocean.
But amidst this shared curiosity, a chilling question arises. What exactly 33 feet? Pressure doubles compared to the surface. In fact, for every 10-meter increment, pressure increases by 1 atmosphere. To illustrate using recent events, the Titanic rests approximately 12,500 feet, or 3,800 meters below the surface, subjecting it to a staggering pressure approximately 380 times greater than that at the surface, equivalent to around 380 atmospheres, or a crushing 6,500 pounds of pressure per square inch. Our human body is not equipped to withstand such extreme pressures, especially when exposed to sudden and drastic changes. Just to give you an idea, our bodies can handle roughly 50 pounds per square inch. However, at this mentioned depth, a person would experience pressures 130 times beyond their tolerance. As a result, the body's various systems suffer immediate and catastrophic damage simultaneously. Our lungs and air-filled spaces in the head become prone to collapse, instantly crushing the body. The air in the lungs is instantly compressed to the size of an earbuds case. That's why deep ocean creatures don't have air pockets within their bodies. In essence, your body's systems, respiratory, circulatory, and central nervous alongside the tissues would be utterly crushed, disintegrating your body into pieces in an instant. Though the outcome is undeniably tragic, there is a glimmer of insight. According to Dave Corley, a former U.S. nuclear submarine officer, when a submarine's hull collapses, it inwardly moves at an astonishing speed of approximately 1,500 miles per hour, or 2,414 kilometers per hour. This is equivalent to 2,200 feet per second, or 671 meters per second. Thus, the complete collapse occurs in just 1 millisecond, or 1,000th of a second. In comparison, a human brain instinctively responds to a stimulus in roughly 25 milliseconds, while a rational response, from sensing to acting, typically takes around 150 milliseconds. That's 25 to 150 times slower than the speed of the implosion. Therefore, the unfortunate individuals aboard the Titan could never have comprehended the unfolding events. It happened far too quickly for the brain to make sense, or even transmit pain signals. However, there's another crucial aspect to consider. Inside a submarine, the air may contain a concentration of hydrocarbon vapors. When the hull collapses, the air undergoes spontaneous ignition, leading to a subsequent explosion after the initial rapid implosion. Temperatures can soar dramatically. In an instant, the explosion engulfs all the crushed fragments, potentially reducing them to ashes and dust. As unfortunate as it may be, this decomposed matter, blending with water, becomes part of marine life. That's why experts and researchers, well-versed in the consequences of catastrophic implosions, believe that recovering the remains of a human body becomes an overwhelming challenge. If you like this video, hit that subscribe button now and join our community. By subscribing, you'll help us create and share even more powerful stories that will brighten our day and broaden our perspectives. Your simple action can make a big difference to our mission. Thank you for being a part of this journey. Subscribe today. Also,
talk about an offer that's hard to refuse. Our David Pogue was invited recently to join the highly select and very small group of people who've actually made it to the bottom of the Atlantic to view firsthand the eerie remains of the Titanic. It promised to be quite a journey, quite a story besides.
Maybe you've heard the story of the Titanic.
Iceberg, right ahead!
I think there was a movie about it.
Come on, give me a hand!
For the most part, the only people who've ever seen the Titanic since that night have been scientists. Until now.
It's a very unusual business. It's its own category. It's a new type of travel.
Stockton Rush is the CEO of OceanGate, a company that offers dives to the Titanic in a one-of-a-kind carbon fiber submersible for $250,000 per person.
Who are the typical
clientele for these missions?
We have clients that are Titanic enthusiasts, which we refer to as Titaniacs. We have people who have mortgaged their home to come and do the trip. And we have people who don't think twice about a trip of this cost. We had one gentleman who had won the lottery.
And this summer, Rush invited us to come along. We departed from St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada, the easternmost tip of North America, about 400 miles from the Titanic.
That's the last we'll be seeing of land for 8 days.
Aboard a chartered oil rig servicing ship. During our 2-day journey into the North Atlantic, we got to know our fellow adventurers. They included everyone from Indian industry mogul Shrenik Baldota.
Yeah, they call me a wild monk.
The wild monk?
Yeah, because I look like a monk. I'm very calm, but I have these extreme interests.
To bank executive Renata Rojas.
I'm trying to fulfill a dream. I've been wanting to go to Titanic and see it with my own eyes since before they found it.
She's been saving up to see the Titanic for 30 years.
Dreams don't have a price. Some people want a Ferrari, some people buy a house. I wanted to go to Titanic.
But the star of the show is the Titan, Stockton Rush's custom-built submersible. 5-inch thick carbon fiber, capped on each end by a dome of titanium. If all went well, I myself would be spending about 12 hours sealed inside on a dive to the Titanic. Not gonna lie, I was a little nervous. An experimental submersible vessel that has not been approved or certified by any regulatory body and could result in physical injury, disability, emotional trauma, or death. Where do I sign?
Oh-ho! Take your shoes off, that's customary.
Okay. Wow. Inside, the sub has about as much room as a minivan.
So this is not your grandfather's submersible. We only have one button, that's it. It should be like an elevator. You know, it shouldn't take a lot of skill.
The Titan is the only 5-person sub in the world that can reach Titanic depths, 2.4 miles below the sea. It's also the only one with a toilet, sort of. And yet, I couldn't help noticing how many pieces of this sub seemed improvised.
We can use these off-the-shelf components.
I got these from Camper World. We run the whole thing with this game controller.
Come on! It seems like this submersible has some elements of MacGyver-y jerry-riggedness. I mean, you're putting construction pipes as ballast.
I don't know if I'd use that description of it, but there's certain things that you want to be buttoned down. So the pressure vessel is not MacGyver at all, because that's where we work with Boeing and NASA and the University of Washington. Everything else can fail. Your thrusters can go, your lights can go, you're still going to be safe.
But when expedition manager Kyle Bingham studied the forecast for our Titanic dive, he concluded that the waves would be too big to launch the sub.
We're looking at 6 feet, and then it bumps up a little bit.
Our Titanic adventure would have to wait. But Stockton Rush offered our CBS crew a consolation dive to the continental shelf 80 miles away. Apparently there's a lot of sheer cliffs underwater to see, shark breeding ground. They say it's really cool. The crew closes the hatch from the outside with 17 bolts. There's no other way out. Here's how the launch is supposed to go. The sub is attached to a huge floating platform. Motorboats drag it down the big orange ramp into the sea.
We're in the water, we're floating.
Woo!
They are going to come and prepare the platform for the next phase, which is the sinking.
The platform submerges to around 30 feet, where the water is much calmer than on the surface.
You're in the water, people.
Divers detach the sub from the platform, and away you go, in theory.
Hull integrity, holding.
And what happened next? You won't be disappointed, as we'll show you a little later on Sunday morning. Our dive in the OceanGate submersible had made it down only 37 feet when this happened.
So apparently those floats there came off the platform, and that wasn't supposed to happen, so we're scrubbing?
Yeah, I think that's the consensus up here.
Copy that.
I was crushed. My diving adventures were over.
Every expedition has its challenges, all of them. I have not been in one expedition where things have to be adjusted, adapted, changed, or canceled at the end of the day. You're at the mercy of the weather.
Renata Rojas speaks from painful experience. Over the years, she's been booked on 3 Titanic expeditions. All 3 were canceled.
You just cry a lot and just keep the dream alive, because it's something that I have to do.
Our expedition had to wait out 2 more days of rough seas. Fortunately, there's a lot to do in the North Atlantic.
I'm the king of the surface vessel!
There's sea life, ship tours, atmospheric effects.
And that, my friends, is called a fog bow.
You can also hang out with scientists. Researchers like deep sea biologist Steve Ross and ocean archaeologist Rob Mather join every expedition. In effect, the passengers are funding their science.
How scientific is this expedition?
I don't do show science. So our job is to do real and important and valid work.
While you're down there, will you look for this giant heart-shaped diamond on a chain?
I think that's not there.
On our 6th day at sea, the weather cleared. The dive was a go.
Titan, sitting at 3742 meters, reports on bottom.
But that was the last of the good news.
I said, do you know where we are? 100 meters to the bow, then 470 to the bow. If you are lost, so are we.
There's no GPS underwater, so the surface ship is supposed to guide the sub to the shipwreck by sending text messages.
Turn 30 degrees right?
Probably, 30 degrees.
But on this dive, communications somehow broke down. The sub never found the wreck.
We were lost. We were lost for 2.5 hours.
Rush says he'll offer those passengers a free do-over next year. And that's just one cost of doing this business.
Are you making money on this operation?
No. So, not yet. People might say, hey, that's a lot of money, $250,000. But we went through over $1 million of gas.
It was our last day at sea. There was one last chance to reach the Titanic. And this time, good weather and good fortune were aligned.
Slow down, it's just in front of us. Just we're in front of the anchor.
Oh my gosh, here's the bow,
do it
guys.
Again, yeah.
You guys see it?
Look at that.
Now, Titanic tourism has its detractors, but these expeditions don't disturb the wreck or retrieve artifacts. And Stockton Rush says
plagued OceanGate systems, which is an estimated position source utilizing acceleration, deceleration, pitch, and roll from the computers that transmit this data. The Titan, in contrast, appeared to rely only on data provided by the surface support vessel. In 2019, OceanGate published a blog post explaining why the Titan was not certified by any ship authority, which is a huge red flag. OceanGate stated, "The vast majority of marine and aviation accidents are actually a result of operator error, not mechanical failure, and argued that classification focused solely on the physical state of the vessel and not the corporate actions, which are characterized as a constant committed effort and a focused corporate culture of maintaining high-level operational. Journalist David Progue, who rode on the Titan to view the Titanic in 2022, noted during his expedition, the surface support vessel lost track of the Titan for about 4 to 5 hours, and mentioned that adding a locator beacon was actually discussed during this event. They could still send short text to the sub, but they had no idea where it was. It was quiet and very tense, and they shut off the ship's internet to keep us from tweeting. The craft was also controlled by a video game controller, which sounds like some cool Silicon Valley. OceanGate started by purchasing Antipodes, which is a submersible vacuum control, which was their first test bed for testing and learning about this entire endeavor. Next, they built Cyclops 1, which is in collaboration with University of Washington's Applied Physics Laboratory. And this was a deeper sea vessel capable of reaching a max depth of 500 meters. Still nowhere near deep enough for the Titanic, but this was their next step and their next iteration. In the early design, the hull was made of carbon fiber, and the whole submersible would dive vertically with pivoting seats to ensure the passengers remained upright. Now, it was said that Boeing worked with OceanGate and the University of Washington on their initial design analysis, but we'll get back. Finally, they would arrive at the Titan, their final product that would actually be rated for 1,000 meters. One of the key takeaways about the Titan is that this is a carbon fiber and titanium hulled submersible. Now, this is really exotic in the world of materials. We've been using high-strength steel and aluminum for a long time, and we have data, engineering data on how they fail and what to look for and test methodologies. But carbon fiber is still quite exotic. In fact, any car you've ever driven probably doesn't have much carbon fiber in it. The only exceptions are really, really high-end supercars, or even in the case of aviation, more recently with the Boeing Dreamliner. But before that, we've always used aluminum and titanium and other materials like that. So just generally, there's less known about it, and it's also really difficult to make sure that we get it right. OceanGate signed a contract with Spencer Composites in January 2017 for the carbon composite cylinder. This was the same company that built the composite pressure hull for the single-person Deep Flight Challenger for Steve Fossett. After Fossett passed away, Deep Flight Challenger was acquired by Richard Branson's Virgin Oceanic, which had announced plans to conduct a series of 5 dives to the deepest points of the ocean. But Deep Flight refused to endorse the plan, as the craft had been designed to dive only once. In a statement, they said the problem is the strength of the Deep Flight Challenger does decrease after each dive. It's strongest on the first dive, said Adam Wright, the firm's president. It was designed to set the record, dive to the deep, and then be retired as an exhibit in the Smithsonian. This is a really crucial part, because sometimes in engineering what it comes down to is the operational lifetime and understanding it. And this might have been at play here. And by the way, I tried to go to OceanGate.com to get a little bit more information, and I noticed that their site was taken down on June 22nd. So after the disappearance of the Titan in 2023, the University of Washington stated that APL, their Applied Physics Laboratory, had no involvement in design, engineering, or testing of the Titan submersible. A Boeing spokesperson also said that Boeing was not a partner on the Titan and did not design or build it. The Director of Marine Operations filed a quality control report in January 2018, stating that no non-destructive testing, or NDI, of the carbon fiber hull had taken place to check for voids or delaminations in the carbon fiber layup that could compromise the hull strength. NDI, non-destructive investigation, NDT, non-destructive testing, is a way of checking something to make sure that it's safe without actually breaking it apart, because really the best way to check if something is safe is to cut it in half, break it, and go over. It's that much more difficult because carbon fiber doesn't bend or yield or get grooves and cracks the way other materials do. It requires a lot of information and insight. Lockridge was told that OceanGate would rely on the real-time acoustic monitoring system, which he felt would not warn the crew of potential failure with sufficient time to safely abort the mission and evacuate. The acrylic window that you look out of was only rated for 1,300 meters because OceanGate would not fund the design of a window rated for 4,000 meters. In that meeting, he reiterated his concerns and added that he would refuse to allow crew testing without a hull scan. Lockridge was dismissed from his position as a result. I'm sure it was all sealed off and we'll never know exactly what was agreed upon, but that is absolutely terrifying. During a human piloted descent on December 10th, 2018, Stockton Rush used the vertical thrusters to overcome unexpected positive buoyancy when descending past 10,000 feet. These submersibles are like a balloon with air inside, right? So it's hard for them to dive. And so they have different ways and ballast systems to be able to accomplish that. But for whatever reason, around 10,000 feet, he had to use vertical thrusters to continue his descent. And when this happened, it caused interference with the communication systems. Between spinning propellers, the disturbance in the wake of the water coming off those propellers and everything else, they lost contact for 1 hour. Now, Rush was thrilled to call himself the second person to solo dive to 13,000 feet after James Cameron. And we know it happened again because of that report from the reporter. After these tests were completed in January 2020, the hull of the Titan began showing signs of cyclical fatigue, and the craft was derated to 3,000 meters. Now, the hull was repaired and again rated again for 4,000 meters of diving depth. But by who? And was everything done properly? It's impossible to know. Probably what happened is they built a vessel which was in and of itself pretty impressive. The carbon fiber layup, the composite structure, titanium. This was an exotic craft, and it had a viewing window to go see the Titanic. These are things that human beings could not do before. But the problem is every craft, every vessel, every engineering device has an operational lifetime. Now, the way engineers do this is by testing something and figuring out how many cycles can we hit this with before problems start to emerge. And then they add a safety factor. If we're going to build this out of aluminum, if we're going to build it from carbon fiber, we have to do a test every 1,000 hours, 500 hours, whatever the case might be. A complete overhaul where they tear down the wall panels and inspect, and they'll actually get out and check for any cracks and other impurities and imperfections, because any crack or any little divot can be a stress concentration point where it'll start to impound and fail. Then finally they'll say at this many hours, 20,000 flat hours, whatever the number might be, the aircraft is retired. That doesn't mean it's going to fall apart, but we know we tested it for millions of hours and nothing bad will happen in this window. And that is the operational window. Odds are a plane could probably fly for thousands more flights after that, but we don't want to do that. That is the operational lifetime. What was the operational lifetime of the Titan? Was it ever established? They were not doing NDIs or NDTs, non-destructive testing, to see what was happening to the carbon fiber. Again, carbon fiber is a mesh weave that is laid in alternating patterns and then glued up. It is incredibly strong and incredibly impressive as an engineering material, but it's equally not as well studied. We have 100 years of history and experience with high strength steel and aluminum and other materials, but this is a new frontier. And that's why this is so important to cover. New frontiers are exciting. They're sexy, they're glamorous, right? Air travel. We're on the brink of space tourism where rich people can buy a ticket to go up and tour around the moon, have a nice little catered lunch and come home. Whenever we have new frontiers, we have unknowns. That's what makes it a frontier. There's not a playbook. And when you have to build vessels able to withstand the pressures of the ocean's deep, deep waters, there's a lot that is unknown. That's why we don't have commercial versions of this. I think this vessel just had some sort of a crumple or some defect or deformation. Something was happening over a couple of cycles. I mean, they did successfully go down and come back three times. And that fourth time, they crumpled. Honestly, I don't think any vessel that goes to the Mariana Trench or 12,000 feet in the Atlantic should have a life more than a couple of cycles. And I think what they were trying to do, I think Stockton Rush was trying to make these tickets affordable, right? Now, they started at $125,000, double that by the time these guys went on at $250,000, right? $250,000 sounds like a ton of money. The real price for this probably should have been $1 million, 1.5. That allows you to replace the vessel every so often, or to do complete disruptive testing to replace parts. There's a whole slew of things that have to happen. But I think in the interest of trying to be affordable, being on the ship yourself, the prestige of your reputation, trying to build a brand, trying to build a company, they took all kinds of shortcuts and did things they do not understand. And I'll be honest with you, we know more about space than we do our deep oceans or the deep earth. These are just really, really hard environments to get to. This is tragic. You know, I was an optimist. I was hoping that we would find them somewhere and that this would all kind of be a learning lesson without loss of life. It didn't work out that way. But in engineering, we have to always learn from our mistakes. If you're a believer in freedom and these people took the risk, they knew what they were doing, I do agree with that. I'm a believer of freedom and taking your own risk or taking your own choices. But did they fully understand what this vessel was? Was it fully known? Were the risks really well known to them? Probably not. So those are things that we can try to improve upon. And maybe the next time somebody comes up with this idea to do deep ocean exploration, there's better methodology in place.
It's important to appreciate that for atmospheric diving, there's no wiggle room in pressure vessels. They either fail or they do not. No such thing as a slow steel in a DSV. This DSV consisted of a carbon fibre composite tube with two hemispherical titanium end caps, one of which contained a viewport. There are reports that this viewport was only certified to 1,300 metres of depth, with the DSV regularly diving to 4,000. Most pressure vessels in the world are metal, usually steel. Steel and titanium. That means it's consistent throughout and has equal strength in all directions. To understand whether a construction is safe would require extensive knowledge of failure modes, test regimes, and fatigue effects. This would be at least a PhD level of knowledge. This is another reason certification exists. It's not just a catch-all excuse. It ensures a trusted third party with that knowledge has applied it. Perhaps of even more concern to me is the interface between the carbon fibre composite and the titanium end caps. Interfacing different materials is always a challenge. Every other DSV in existence has a pressure vessel consisting of a metal sphere which does have viewports. OceanGate posted this video that shows the titanium sealing ring being installed onto the carbon fibre composite with epoxy resin. As far as I'm aware, this is probably the only viable option to do so, but I'm far from convinced it's suitable for the following reasons. I'm assuming this resin has some suitable level of compliance. Regardless, it's subject to differential strain between the two materials. It's likely to introduce cracks or defects, not necessarily a critical issue if properly identified and managed. But I see no evidence to dispense of this incident based on the fact that doctors previously quoted that that is impossible. Visual inspection is clearly impossible, and I absolutely would not trust my life to it in respect to this. Such a critical dust-free environment, maybe even temperature control, is extremely handling procedures for vacuum degassing the resin. I see none of that in this video. It was performed in an open warehouse. The document has clearly stated this philosophy. Once the pressure vessel is secure, and we can ascend and are safe. Both of these points may be true. We've just covered as long as the pressure vessel is secure. But I think a lot of observers don't realise how many conditions as long as we can ascend depends on. In a harsh environment, almost everything becomes safe and critical. The most widely reported control system. Control unit is an off-the-shelf game control. Game controls are great for applications like drones, remote turrets, that kind of thing. I'm not aware of any example of them being used as a primary means of control or propulsion, especially for anything man-made. You can reasonably imagine an off-the-shelf controller as a secondary that could be passed around passengers to let them have a go. But as a primary means of control, absolutely not. The obvious points, such as Bluetooth connection, less reliable can cause interference, are absolutely non-trivial here. It's easy to say, no, but control's non-life critical. We can ascend to the surface at any point. We have multiple redundancies for that. It's simply not true, especially for a wreck dive where a sudden loss of control can cause a collision. Even encountering difficulties during control of the vessel increases task loading on the operator, potentially creates a high-stress situation where mistakes are made. Logitech game controllers most certainly do not have such a certification. Neither do lights from Camping World or LED power indicators from an electronics hobby store. The monitors and other electronics we see on the vessel are similarly rated. The electronics failing and giving off smoke may seem unlikely, but the stakes are so high, especially when they use out of specification. The thought of riding a sealed vessel with any non-negligible risk of fire really does freak me out more than anything else I've discussed. There were no personal restraints. The occupants sat bare feet on the flat floor. This has two major issues. This opens up the possibility of disorientation for the pilot. It's a common issue in aviation. I'd expect him to have a fixed frame of reference relative to the rest of the craft, which is achieved by a decent seat and restraints. Secondly, general safety. even a relatively trivial scenario of the craft surfacing in heavy sea would turn unpleasant at best with no restraints. At worst, it's not difficult to imagine occupants being seriously or fatally injured, particularly in an uncontrolled ascent or if the pilot loses the ability to steer the vessel. The egress hatch was widely reported as being sealed and only openable from the outside, and this is absolutely true. Every other DSV has a plug hatch openable from both sides. There is one case where an openable hatch caused a near disaster. Apollo 1 is often quoted here, but I'd like to discuss a prior incident, Mercury Redstone 4, where the hatch was prematurely blown, leading to the loss of the craft and almost the loss of the pilot. In this case, an operator-enabled hatch actually increased the risk, but the fact is the hatch blew off early. I have seen no evidence OceanGate took necessary mitigations to ensure an externally accessible hatch was actually safer, fire management, redundant breathing systems, etc. But it's always worth recognising that risks and the interplay between them are not always as glaringly obvious as we think. By the way, Gus Grissom, who was the pilot for Mercury Redstone 4, was actually killed in the Apollo 1 fire, which was a cruel twist of fate. Here is an unmanned ROV. Here is the Alden DSV. Here is Titan. There are external cables everywhere. In fact, here's a clip showing what appears to be zip ties holding them in place. One of the two easily foreseeable unreasonable scenarios for the craft is entanglement, the other being loss of hull integrity.
Found among some of the wreckage of the Titan submersible. We had seen pictures of the submersible wreckage today in Canada, offloaded onto shore in Newfoundland, Canada, and now we know, according to the Coast Guard, that human remains were among some of that wreckage. I want to put up the statement, the relevant portion of the statement from the Coast Guard. It says, in part, quote, United States medical professionals will conduct a formal analysis of presumed human remains that have been carefully recovered within the wreckage at the site of the incident. And we do have some of the pictures of the pieces of wreckage offloaded today from a ship in Canada. You can see what appears to be the nose cone, the front of the submersible that surrounds the area that would have been the porthole, also a twisted piece of the hull and some wires, potentially maybe the controls or a portion of the controls of that submersible. But again, really just within the last 20 to 30 minutes, some information that families likely have been waiting on, that human remains were discovered. We had heard from the Coast Guard that they would be especially careful in trying to find that wreckage, to be aware of any remains that were to be found. But we now know that the remains, along with the evidence, will be transported on a U.S. Coast Guard cutter from Canada to the U.S. to be part of this investigation. It's also likely that officials will try to identify the remains. No information about to whom those remains belong, but obviously families likely were waiting for some amount of information regarding their loved ones and any remains that could be recovered. The Coast Guard saying that they did so today. Blake?